What's up, everyone? We are here, part 5. Marco, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Excited to
rocking the specs.
Yeah, I wanted to get a really good look at this guitar.
Really good. Yeah, I got a surprise for you.
Yeah.
You ready?
Let's
part
see it.
5, we're here. I just called you in to start filming this. So I was kind of here over the late part of last week into the weekend, and got a little bit of progress on this bad boy. Check it out.
It's a guitar. It's a functional guitar. It's a hybrid open tuning that you designed just now. But
yes, it's my own. It's custom select tuning. So yeah, we got this thing kind of really far down the road. It looks like a guitar now. It has strings on it. It's not in tune, and we'll talk about why in a second. But we really got we really got through a lot of the paces. So kind of this episode we've decided is really focused on the assembly of the guitar, kind of putting all the parts together. Last episode we talked about making the cool pickups, so we got a bunch of great feedback from the customers on that one. They just really like the inside look. I think we revealed all of our secrets. So if you didn't catch episode 4, catch it, because it's really cool. We made this awesome relic set of pickups. On this one we kind of ran into some surprises. There's been a lot of interesting things, and while we're talking here I'm going to show some b-roll of this guitar. But I guess let's start first before the surprises. What's kind of your first impression now that it's all the way together?
Well, I mean, it's like we had the neck for so long, and I was just like, okay, I had gotten used to the neck, and I was like, yeah, I would hold it sometimes on my way out.
Catch you like in the middle of work doing some air guitar on it and stuff.
Practicing my shreddies.
Yeah,
but then getting the body and then getting it all together and relicking it all started kind of like ramping up, exponential excitement. And now that it's like a full guitar and even strumming it not in tune, like you can feel how resonant it is. And so we're like, okay, cool. It was very worth the wait, I think.
Yeah, just exciting to get to the last little bit. We've got knobs and the string tree to go as far as the actual hardware of the guitar. We went through this whole process, and I'll kind of show some longer videos of. I mean, this is going to be a long episode, just to warn you ahead of time. You probably looked at the time and they're like, whoa, there's a lot. What we did is actually I basically had a lapel mic and the camera rolling, and I pretty much went through the whole entire process of wiring this thing up, feeding the pickups through. Ran into some surprises with that for sure. The cavity to get into from the bridge pickup route into the electronics was too small. I had to re-drill that. I noticed at the end there was an issue with the hole. I actually didn't quite get it right matched up there. It may have shifted when I put that tape on there a couple episodes ago. So it was actually just like maybe 1/8 of an inch or less off here. So everything's hidden, but there is an extra hole under there because we had to realign it. But the pickguard holes went really well. Pickup installation went really well. So we'll show coming up here in the video, just getting the pickups in, the wiring. It's a long process, and I tried to speed up as much of it as possible. And I've been a little under the weather the last little bit. We both have kind of. So this was like one of those where I had a bunch of choking parts in this video, literally choking to try to get it done. So I had to edit all that out, and I think we've got enough content that we're happy with. And again, I'm going to keep showing more shots of what was happening here. We got the tuners installed, so we'll go through that process of drilling those holes. That was really nerve-wracking. I was sweating bullets a little bit there too. You mentioned this thing was not quite set up, so we're going to show you some shots of the side of this from the E string, the big E string down. We're sitting pretty high in the action here. We're probably, I don't even know. I'm not going to give a measurement, but it's very, very high, obviously. When we got this nut, this neck, the nut was pre-slotted, and I'm going to use the term slotted very loosely because there was basically just indicator lines where the nut should go. Now everything looks good in terms of where the nut is laid out, but as I put strings on this thing and started putting it up to tension, there really wasn't anything for the small E string. So I had to kind of cut a little slot there just to get the strings to rest
hang out in there. And
we want the strings on there for the next episode when we lay that string tree on there. And I wanted to get it strung up just to surprise you too.
Yeah, so I mean, goodness me, what a surprise.
Came into work and you're like, wait a minute, there's a new guitar on the wall. You had like the spidey senses, right?
I was just about to say, like, there's a different color in a different spot, so
there's something's amiss, and mentally you're going through. But yeah, this is it. We're super excited. Really, now that we've got strings on it, it's kind of the vibe of this whole instrument is really starting to come together. Just the color matching, getting a feel for the neck with strings on. There's something like next level about that, right? You were saying you're just holding the neck and kind of getting a feel for it. This is now pretty pretty sweet. I'm excited to hear these A4s. Now, you'll see in this video I did the tap test kind of, but I have no idea exactly how they sound yet.
Yeah,
I haven't even tuned it up because I really want to spend the time setting it up and then giving this a full run through. And we'll do that in episode 6 as well.
Yeah, so definitely stay tuned for that one. That'll be an exciting one for sure.
And so I think we kind of covered basically what happened. Now we're going to show you what happened. We're going to walk you through this process. Here we go. We're going to go through each step that we did in part 5. All right, we got the Tele over here. Now it's time to do some assembly. So we're going to talk through the order of this, kind of show you some of the parts of this. Some of this is going to be very redundant, very simple in terms of what it actually is, but we do want to show you as much of this as possible. So one of the first things we're going to do is get those tuners on. We'll talk about the tuners in just a second, but I do want to mention a couple things we talked about early on. We talked about adding the ground wire for the bridge. So I'll show you that. You remember in the previous episode where we drilled a hole, we called it our down and out method. We drilled the hole down for the ground wire. So what we're going to use is this tinned pushback wire. We use this to hook up you saw it in the last episode where we hooked up the Tele pickups. That's going to be our ground wire to the underside of the bridge, because when we put in our pickups, we've got those stainless steel mounting screws which are non-conductive. So we need to have something connecting to this to ground the strings to prevent some of that extra noise. So we'll go through that. We'll go through the installation of the tuners. So we'll do the tuners first because I'd like to leave this bolted up. So we're going to kind of reposition the Telecaster here, move it around and show you how we get those tuners lined up, because we've got to drill some holes in the back of the headstock. So here we go. All right, so over here at the back of the headstock, we're going to be placing these tuners on here. Now, I did want to mention, we didn't talk a little bit about this, but we did have a little bit of fit issues with the ferrules, so we put a little bit of caulking around those. Sometimes, depending on how you get your neck from each manufacturer, you may find a little bit of issues with these parts fitting into the holes perfectly. So we didn't do too bad there, but we put a little caulking in and around the kind of threads on the inside of those, just to kind of hold them in place. This style of headstock, this style of tuners, doesn't really allow us to lock them down. That would be my least favorite thing about the vintage style tuners, to be honest. So what we're going to do is get our tuners in place here. These are actually a locking tuner, so we've got a locking pin with a flathead screwdriver that will go down into the post. So it's kind of a best of both worlds. It looks the part, but you've got like the stability of a locking tuner there. And I think these are just a Clusen brand that we picked up. So now our biggest challenge as we put these tuners in place is how do we make sure that they're straight on the back, and in between each tuner we're going to have to drill a small hole for our little screws. So these are going to be quite small screws, as you can see here. So we're going to be needing to drill holes for all of those, and probably about a 1/16 inch drill bit will cover that. Again, you want to make sure that you're drilling something that's slightly smaller than the diameter of that. We want to be able to line everything up first. So the way we're going to do that is by getting some kind of straight edge. In this case, we're using kind of a piece of flat work. You can use a metal ruler. What we want to do is kind of help ensure that these tuners are lined up perfectly. So I'm going to set that on the back here, and that's going to naturally put them into the right place. And then we're going to take a look at it from different angles before we commit to drilling. So this gives us kind of that straight line, baseline for that. And the way we're going to kind of keep them in place, again, we're going to try to shoot for a straight hole directly in the center of each of those. The way we're going to do that is kind of use this straight edge, and then we're going to just tape it down. I'm going to take a sharp screw and I'm going to make a guide hole, as opposed to just letting this be and going and trying to drill, because if I bump it with the drill or anything comes off any other side, that means we could potentially have these holes in the wrong spot, and we certainly don't want that. The thing about these tuners as well, and I'll pull them out so you can see, sometimes the way they sit in there, they're not perfectly together like you would see here on the camera. Sometimes the gap is just a little bit big, but the head of the screw is going to hold them together. When I feel like I've got it pretty straight, I can do a couple other things. I can add another piece of tape to the underside here just to give it more reinforcement. never hurts to try to tack it down as much as possible. And this is just one method to do this. I know that there's a lot of other methods out there, but that's how we get it done. Now we're going to go through with this fine point of the screw and just mark a hole that we can drill. Just to make another suggestion of what you might try here is something like a fine point marker. And that way you can get down in between everything and mark a dot where each of those pre-drill holes is going to be. All right, as you can see there, we've got our marks for where we want to put these screw holes. Just a couple quick things to note. As you set this up, you want to make sure your depth is correct. You're not going to drill back through the headstock. So a good way to do this is to take the screw and set it in to the side of the tuner and get a rough measurement of how deep that needs to go. And we don't want to go too shallow, but we don't want to go through the headstock, obviously. So we want to mark on our drill bit the distance, back it up here so you can see it, the distance from where that screw thread is going to go. We're going to put a piece of tape on there as kind of a pseudo guide stop. All right, so we've got that tape placed on there. I'm going to keep rolling it around. Then I'm just going to double check how that matches up to the screw itself and see if that's an appropriate depth for us to stop. So I think I've got this prepped where I'm pretty comfortable with the depth. If you're at all concerned about the depth, go over to the side of your headstock like this and just confirm that it's not going to go too far. We really, again, before you do this, if you're working like we are with a headstock with no holes, this is always really important. So we're just going to chuck that up in the drill. We're going to try to get as perfectly square up and down on these holes. Drill them and see how we did. All right, our holes are drilled and hopefully we did a good job with that. We had a few kind of quirky things with our drill bit popping out halfway through, but didn't leave any major dings. But good thing we're working with a relic guitar just in case. But we'll line up these tuners again and then we will get them tacked down. Here we go. All right, one final note here. Right before we fully tack these down, we still have some flexibility to re-straighten the tuners. We did pretty good on our holes. We have just a slight shift on a couple of them, but that's where you don't tack those down fully, and then you can kind of twist and bend them there just to get in the right alignment that you're happy with. So we will kind of move those in place and then finally just tack them down with a small screwdriver. Right, everything is locked down. There's a nice look at our alignment there. We did really good with that last little final adjustment. One thing to mention too is make sure you have a really nice screwdriver bit. If those holes get off, if you have to really crank them down, you want to make sure the bit fits the screw head as good as possible, because these are known to strip out, and that is a huge pain if you break one of the heads off of those or the screw strips out to try to remove that screw. So always make sure you go overkill. If you're doing this for a customer, if you're doing this for yourself, always consider maybe buying new screwdriver bits before you start. Highly recommend this Music Nomad Tech screwdriver. The bit that comes with it is very solid, better than you're gonna find at like a Home Depot or something like that. So that's what we use to kind of final lock these down. Obviously don't want to power drill too hard and have something slip. So finish them by hand if you can. All right, back over here to the bench, we are going to remove the bridge. I've only got 2 screws in here right now because we used that in the previous video to align all of the pieces with the control plate and the pick guard. We're going to take this off and we're going to add the ground wire. Okay, that's all removed. Now we're going to add that ground wire back in. Again, I mentioned we're using a 22 gauge, just cloth hookup wire. We want to have quite a bit of this stripped back, and I'll show you why here in a second. So you can pull this back, grab some pliers, kind of strip it back. We need a lot of metal contact there. We are making sure that those two are touching. Okay, you want to make sure. You can use a stranded piece as well. This is kind of a pretend wire, but this works really well. I like this wire because it is very flexible. You can kind of form it however works best for you. So what we're going to do for this ground wire is we're going to run through the hole that we had here. We're going to run it also into the electronic cavity here in a second. We're going to run this all the way down, and I'll go ahead and just kind of shove it in here for now. We're going to run this to the back of the volume pot later on. A lot of people will run this into one of the mounting screw holes. Sometimes that kind of messes with the alignment a little bit, so I don't want to do that completely, but I'll show you what we're going to do to make sure there's good contact between the bridge itself. And then back over here you can see I'm going to run that wire like I talked about into our control plate area, but I need to get this set up before I officially mount the bridge. And also remember, before we mount the bridge, we're going to have to put the pickup itself in there. So that's going to be simply putting the bridge mounting screws in, getting everything ready, then finally tacking it down. So make sure you do all that in the right order. Otherwise, you're going to have to take it back off and do it again. All right, a couple quick notes on getting that bridge pickup in there. We removed the screws. Remember, we talked about that we left the screws in during the waxing process. We're taking those out, obviously, because we need to go through the top. Much of this next part is very familiar to people watching, but if you've never done this on a Telecaster, this is how you have to do it. You have to remove the bridge to replace the bridge pickup. That's kind of important. We're going to be using some silicone springs or tubes that we call springs because they're going to allow us to adjust the pickup heights. I'm going to put those on the underside here. I'll show you a shot before we get that pickup installed. There you go. We are ready to mount the pickup in there, and that will allow us to adjust the height of the pickup. And again, we mentioned these are stainless steel screws. They look pretty good in conjunction with the relic piece there. So I'm happy with that look. So now what we're going to do is line up that bridge pickup here. Try to make sure I can get you a good view on the camera. Make sure everything's lined up. When you're placing this, make sure you're as square as possible. You don't want one of your mounting screws to clip the wires of your bridge pickup. I'm going to grab my drill here. And we're just going to make sure this is set in there. Once it's set in there, we know we can adjust that height later on. Give it a couple squeezes since we're lined up pretty well. And as we mentioned in the last video, we overwound this pickup, so we're right at kind of the limit of our space kind of fitting in there, but it's going to look really nice. See how the relic kind of matches beautifully with that. So we are ready to now officially mount the bridge. Here we go. So obviously in this case with the Telecaster, you have a separate channel for your neck pickup than you do for your bridge pickup. So that's kind of nice because you don't have everything running into the bridge cavity and over. Some humbucker guitars do that, and it gets a little bit tricky trying to shove all your wires through the one hole into here. So this is a really great part about a Telecaster is we can kind of keep those things separate. So we are going to make sure this wire is kind of in place. I'm going to pull that ground wire over here and kind of just see if I can get it out of the way a little bit. One thing we might run into is maybe these screws might be slightly long. We'll find out here in a second. But if they are, you can trim them. You can find shorter screws if you do run into something like that. It really depends on the depth of the route for each individual company. So as we kind of get this all in place, you'll notice the ground wire here. I'll zoom back in on the ground wire. You can see it right there on the left side. I want to make sure this is laying across the body and that any of that shielding, the black kind of outer part cloth there, I want to make sure it's just going to cover a lot of real estate when we tack this down. Yeah, I mentioned before, some people will run it down into the screw hole. That's totally fine as an option, but I know where the area is that we sanded and we want as much metal to metal contact. So usually we'll do kind of a half loop there. Again, just another method you might consider trying. All right, so as we look at there, I had a little trouble getting both cloth wires in there. So I'm just gonna open up that connector hole with just a slightly larger drill bit. Okay, so that should give us just enough real estate to fit those 3 cloth wires in, one from each of the pickups and then the ground wire there. Everything's fitting nice and good there. You can see my wires popping out here, just opening up that hole slightly. Helped me get everything in there without really struggling to kind of push each part through. Some people will tie another wire to those and pull them through. We just had barely enough real estate to get everything going. So we have everything fitting. Looks like it drops down okay. You can see underneath here, there's that ground wire folding over. I want to make sure I really feel good about where it's contacting underneath where the scrapes are. And in fact, looking at where it lays exactly down, I'm gonna move it around here so I know that it's gonna come in contact with this area that we sanded. So we will pop that down. Everything fits nice and snug. So one thing we're gonna have to watch is we're just gonna make sure that we pull all the wires through. So if anything gets pressed down, we don't want any of these wires touching anything else. So now we're ready to get this bridge mounted. One thing to watch out for is making sure our alignment still is good. Obviously we have a pre-drilled set of holes in here that came that way when we got the body, but we want to put the outside 2 screws in almost all the way before we do the other ones. We want to make sure we kind of anchor the squareness of the bridge itself. And taking a look at making sure that the string through holes are still lining up. We fitted this bridge at the first episode, so we know everything is kind of where we want, but let's go ahead and get it tacked down. So I'm just gonna get these about 3/4 of the way in on the outsides there and just double check where the holes are sitting, where my ground wires are sitting. And I'm gonna give it an extra hand here to hold it in place. And then we're gonna slowly put down each of the sides there. And then everything feels pretty good on that end of things. So we'll put the other 2 screws in almost all the way and then we'll hand tighten it from there. And then for the neck pickup, we're gonna repeat that process. We're gonna put the screws in, put the springs on the back. A lot of people like to direct mount their Tele pickups. I'm not going to do that on this one. I'm going to opt for the adjustability on the outside of the neck pickup. So I'm not gonna wanna have that fixed where the screws are hidden. I know some people don't like that look, but that's what we're doing for this build. That's the way we ordered this pick guard. So we'll get those in place, and then for the way we want to do it, we probably will have to trim the points off of each of these. So let's get that neck pickup mounted. Okay, pickup's mounted in there. Looking very nice. Same process, we're going to make sure that wire runs through here into here. One thing we want to do before we run our neck pickup wire, so we're just going to make a little mark on there, just an indication that that is the neck pickup, which will save us a little bit of hassle later on. So you can use a Sharpie for that. Pickguard is in, so now we can tack it down with our screws. So we're going to take care of the electronic wiring. We're going to remove the jack plate on the side to install the jack, which is going to be threaded in there. So we'll install that and we'll get this thing wired up. Right over at the wiring bench here, we are going to get ready to mount our pre-wired control plate. Now this is nice because of the pre-wiring. All we have to do is hook up each pickup by position and the ground wires for that. Hook up our ground wire from the bridge that we showed you earlier in the video. Hook that up to the back of the volume pot. And then we just have to thread this jack and remount the jack on the side. All right, first thing I'm going to do is I've got my ground wires. I'm going to make sure all of the ground wires are together to the back of the volume pot. So I've got each of the pickup wires here. I have my body ground here. I've got a lot of extra length, so I don't want to have to tuck a ton of wires. So what I'll probably do is trim that ground wire here just a little bit shorter. I want some length where I can pull everything out and still work with it later on. But I want enough of a clean wiring job. I don't want to have a lot of extra runs of wires. So all these grounds are going to get twisted together like so.
That's going to keep everything nice and organized. Let me jump over to the camera, make sure you can see what's happening here. So again, we got all the grounds twisted together right there near the top of the shot. I'm going to add some solder to that, and then we will tack that down to the back of the volume pot. If you notice here, I put some solder on this ahead of time. That's where all those grounds are going to go. It's going to help us to have a better contact here. We're going to run over here and get some solder on this. A nice solder joint there. And then we're going to get this knocked down. And we may find as you run through this, we just have limited space in this cavity. So you may find that you need to trim some wires even further, but we're going to see if we can get away with this for now, just for the purposes of showing you how to get this done. Now you can hold these wires typically for a little bit. You may consider using tweezers or something like that to install them. So now all we've got is the 2 cloth pickup wires. We're noticing one of them is quite a bit longer. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to give that just a little less length. Each of these are pushback wires, so we'll push those back. And then we've got our diagram, so we're going to solder the appropriate pickup into the right section of the lug. So looking at the way this is set up, we marked the neck pickup with the Sharpie, so we know where to put that, and the unmarked one is going to be our bridge pickup. Okay, we've got our neck and bridge pickup wired here. Now for all those who are wiring clean freaks, we do have a nice clean wiring here. We definitely are going to have extra length. So if you're doing this is a good idea to hook them up with more length than you need. And then once you get it in there, we're going to be tap testing the pickups, making sure they work before we actually final screw everything down. So we'll go over and show you the tap testing, and then we will probably clean these up at a later date, just make them a little bit shorter. But again, I like having that ability just to pop this out and work on it or change the wiring. So I like to leave extra length just in case I decide in the future to move the switch down to here, or want to do something more fancy. We always have more wire than we need is a good idea, as opposed to less wire than we're going to have to hot rod some stuff together. All right, everything is in place. We've got the electronics just sitting outside of the guitar still. We're going to do a simple tap test, make sure everything works before we screw it down. So that just involves us putting selector switch. We've got the neck bridge pickup. Both pickups are on, and the neck pickup's working good. We've got our volume here. It's functioning right. We've got our tone knob. You can hear it get darker there. So now we have everything that we need to screw this control plate down. All right, so there's a look at the project as it stands. Everything looked pretty good on the fit. We did have to slightly readjust the screw hole down here. It got bumped, I think, when we pre-drilled that, but everything otherwise turned out really good on the alignment. Everything's working. We re-tap tested it as we tacked down that control plate there, just making sure everything works. We're probably going to want to reposition the jack at some point as well, because when we put in a cable, it's a little tough because the jack is hitting the side of the hole, and it's a very narrow hole, so there's not a lot of margin for error, but sometimes you can kind of spin the jack over here to where when you put a cable in, the contacts kind of push out, so we want to make sure that's not touching anything weird. But we'll take a look at that later on because we're just excited to get this thing put together.
All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that closer look at the Tele build there.
Just a long, me talking forever. Sorry about that, guys. But I wanted to show you all the details that we could.
And it's the good stuff, the stuff that everybody thinks it's like, oh, these things just pop together. But
Yeah,
you know,
right.
Sometimes it's not always as simple as that. But you know, we really want to take this time to like appreciate everybody that has followed this series and took the time to leave a comment, even if it was just like, oh, cool, you know, I like that color of blue or something, you know.
Yeah.
So it really means a lot to us, and it, you know, really spurs us on to like keep doing stuff like this anyway. Like there's already maybe even something that we're like, this kind of has been so much fun and exciting, but you know, we'll see. You'll have to definitely stick around, and stick around also for part 6, which is kind of the plugging in, and you know, it'll be complete, it'll be playable. We can kind of get our thoughts and get your thoughts too. Yeah, so definitely leave a comment and stay tuned.
Awesome. Yeah, and if there's anything that we're not going to go back and recover anything necessarily, but if there's anything that you're like, oh, I would like to see more of this process. I know you mentioned that last video where I was like, I'd like to see, more detail about the relicking of the pickups, or I'd love to see you you know, actually taking the jack out and screwing the jack in into the jack plate or something like that. If there's anything that you'd like to see that we could kind of make a follow-up video on, we'd be more than happy to do that for you. We're already talking about kind of how we're going to showcase the sounds of this guitar. We're really anxious to plug it in. I think we're kind of like holding ourselves back, right, until we get this next section shot, so that way we can rock it out. Each of us will probably have a fight, maybe about who gets to take it home first, maybe.
Yeah,
that's okay. That's all right.
I mean, there's definitely no shortage of guitars around here, right?
Yeah. So long video, guys. Thanks for hanging with us on episode 5 of our MJT and Fender Tele build. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. We'll catch you on part 6.